101 Awakening. This is birth certificate rights. How to withdraw your trust fund from your government. This is now part 2, the killing fields of the food chain industry that you own. You can find my account in YouTube under the chosen ones _101. There are 2 playlists. One is the birth certificate rights. Watch it from the bottom to the top. The second one is the service industries of fear. You can watch that one randomly, as it will just help you how to deal with the service industries of fear. The birth certificate rights will walk you through from 0 to 18. The new videos I'm creating, I will call them how you can withdraw your trust fund. The new videos I'm creating is as if you are now 19, what do you do with that trust fund? And how do you see the overall workings of your corporation? This will give you an understanding how you want to take back your rights or to continue giving the corporation the invisible consent on your life. Remember, all the big main industries are big name brand corporations. Big corporations like Nestle, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, GNC, Loblaws, Costco, and so forth. These industries, because they are global, they will have a president or CEO, a backup to the president, a vice president, a replacement to the vice president, and the worker bees that can be promoted as management. So for a big corporation, let's say McDonald's, a president and a vice president will need to know the overall functionality of the business, from the main business to the subsidiaries of businesses. If something happens to the president, then the vice president should also know this whole process. So the management will not necessarily know the business that the president or the vice president know. The management will also know how to manage the workers. In other words, the knowledge are divided from large, medium to small of knowledge base of their own industry of trade. Now you're probably asking yourself, why are the knowledge divided? If the president or the vice president dies at the same time, would management then be able to take the role of the president or the vice president? The answer is no, because it only knows how to manage the subsidiaries of the business. The management doesn't know how to manage the main industry processes. Now, if the president or the vice president and the management passed away at the same time in a car accident, would the workers still be able to perform their duty of tasks based on that industry of trade? The answer is yes, because they have the knowledge of how to grow the livestock, they have the knowledge of how to process it, they have the knowledge on how to distribute it to all different kinds of consumers, from retail, which are business, or private, which are the home consumers. Consumer of products that pay taxes to your corporation. Now you're questioning to yourself, you mean to say my worker bees can do all this? Can manage all these? So then you're asking yourself, why do I need the president and CEOs or vice presidents or managements for that matter? Or now you have an idea of how your food industry is being managed for distribution, how you will apply all the redundancy that you are now hearing to all these corporations that you own. Because if all these management people are not required to run my industries, how are you then making money on the products that you are supplying to all the different industries that you support? Because remember, you're now the owner of this corporation that you are now hearing how the process of the business works. Now that you know who are the big shots of your company in each industry of trades, you will now would like to spend time with each president or CEO or vice president of each industry to tell you how the whole process of management to deliver the end product to your consumer, the business and private consumers of your products. These are all your products. Now you want to get back to the food production chain of industries. You now want to learn the processing time for killing or dissecting of your product in order for it to be distributed and delivered to all your consumers of your product. So now you will learn in one of your industry called processing of products. So one of the FDA job, the Food, Drug, and Administrators of processes for these industries, the lawmakers of industries, for every new product, they have to go through the who will be affected, the where it will be implemented, the why it's being implemented, the when it will be implemented, and how it will be implemented, and what is the cost for the implementation of the whole process. And once the FDA figure out all these questions, they will now create a law for each industry to follow. So now you're wondering, the workers are following the management's rules, the management is following the vice president and president's rule, and now the vice president and president will now have to follow the FDA rules, which is following the rules of your trustor in the House of Glass of the Government of Canada, which is the Parliament and your prime ministers. Because you're smart, now you're thinking to yourself, if my workers can do all these things for me, why do I need management, vice president, CEOs and presidents, the FDA, the House of Commons, the Prime Minister, when all I need to run my business is to educate my workers from beginning to end of the process, the processes of the different industries. But now you still want to understand how the killing and processing of livestock products will affect your food industry chains. Livestock without refrigeration after killing must be eaten within 3 days. After 3 days, bacteria and fungus will start growing on the dead carcass. Now you're thinking to yourself, aside from who, where, why, when, and how, what packaging does the killing of products required? What are the containments for this product? And if you bring it in, how do you put it out? The disposal of the product. So based on those 3 things that I just mentioned, your main industries are now increasing in size. Because in the packaging of products, you will now have to create subsidiaries of sanitation. You have to think what body wear does each industry will require to handle each product. Do they need a headdress a footwear, an eyewear, a safety gear? Do they have to wear masks? What do you need from each industry if the people managing the products are using liquid or handling solids? Now you also have to think of the environment. What kind of safety procedure will you implement to each of the industry that you own? What you produce must be picked up and disposed of, whether the garbage is for recycling, for burial, or for consumption. To continue the who, where, why, when, what, and how, the packaging of product, the labeling of product, the warnings on products, the expiry date for each product, what is the sell date for each product, and what is the wasteful date for that product. To continue the who, where, why, when, what, and how, you will now have to manage the disposal price for each product. Which of the main industry will you select to do all your disposals of your product? The granted disposal company will now be responsible for the garbage pickup, for the incinerator of the garbage. The disposal company will have their own choice whether to bury the garbage or feed the garbage to other things that can use it. Wow, you're now thinking to yourself, livestock industries, just the killing and distribution is killing a lot of your corporation margins. So now you're asking, how are the worker bees managing the processing of killing of the livestock, and how are they coping of butchering the products for distribution? So now the president will tell you that the worker bees are suffering from different illnesses. The sickness and absenteeism is high during the initial process of learning how to kill a livestock. But the president said, the more the worker bees are trained to do it, the more they get used to it. Just like any other jobs, they become accustomed of the daily grind of processes. Now that the president just identified sicknesses within his industry of trade, the workers or the worker bees will now seek professional help within the medical industries. The doctors, the psychiatrists, the hospitals, the ambulance, which will now benefit the pharmaceutical industries. So you see what your house of glass created? He curated industries that are reliant from each other. And what do these industries have in common with each other? They all support the chemicals of industries, because every industry needs to preserve their processes for a long time for human consumption. The chemicals are studied by scientists inside the FDA industries to create the formulas to put in each product of the main and sub-industries of trade. The scientists will come up with formulas, untested formulas on humans or animals, because nobody knows if the formula really works or not. Each industry reliant from another industry of trade will now combine their formulas into a product. Remember, those formulas are untested on humans and animals. Therefore, the risk of side effects are unknown. Since the formulas will create unknown results, You're now curious what are the side effects or sicknesses caused by the products. Did the sicknesses lead to death? And if it did, how did the president or the corporation management handle the situation? Each major corporation will now go through the press industry, the media, and the communications of industries. Whether the communication will be sent electronically, via the TV, through politicians, through medical industries, through paper, mail, or through a town hall message. They will address who are affected, the places affected, why they got affected, when they got affected, what are the areas affected, the hows, the ifs, and the buts. Now you have to think of all the costs associated with the press industry. That could be dealing fires from different industry that affected the consumers. So will the press tell the truth to the consumers or will tell a lie? Because lies are easier to forgive than admitting to the truth. Because if you admit the truth on your misdemeanor, you are more likely to be sued for their sickness and the death of the consumer of your product. If you're now getting sued because of sicknesses and deaths, then you will now have to notify all your food industries of the cause and effect of that illness and death. The food industries will now have to notify the medical industries of how to handle the issue. The food industry will also now have to notify the pharmaceutical industry to handle the influx of medication requirements to cure the illnesses. The food industries will now call the law firms or the law industry, the judges, the lawyers, the policemen, the different bylaws of how to manage complaints of sicknesses and death. The banking industries will also need to be notified because if the lawsuits are proven correct, then the banks will need to make sure they have enough money to give to the victims of sicknesses and death. If the press decide to hide the truth from the consumers, then they have to speak to all the main industries to make sure they collaborate with the story that the press agent is giving them. Because remember, every industry is reliant on that formula. The untested formulas that the scientists created by the Foods and Drugs Administration, the FDAs of industries. So the press agent will need to make sure to hide all the evidence in different ways. They have to make sure that the garbage is picked up to hide the packagings. They may contact the incinerator to burn the evidence. They may create viruses to delete the data. They may shred the evidence. They may bury the evidence. They may feed the evidence to unsuspected victims. Or they can refrigerate and preserve the evidence for later use and study or for consumption. So now we just created a lot of sub-industries for disposals. The garbage company, the incinerator companies, the electronic companies, the manual companies, the burial companies, the different feeders of companies, and the different refrigerations of companies, such as the hospital morgue or the cemetery morgues. The disposal of chemicals from each of these industries will now affect the air environment, the water, the land, and the food that grows on the land, the food that requires the water, the food that requires the air, in order for it to grow for animals to eat and for humans to consume. So now that you have a somewhat overall idea of how the food production chain industries work, you're now feeling drained. After talking to the president of the food industry, you now have an overall idea of what the process of killing livestock. Now, what else you don't know about these products? What else is the president hiding from you? Because remember, if they're causing sickness and death to people, the home consumers of those products, you and your parents and anybody else around you, are also the home consumers of every products of your industries that you own. Because in reality, if you do grocery in the food chain industry, in reality, natural products from Mother Gaia or Mother Earth is 1/3 of the space of the whole industry. Just like when you do grocery shopping, when you're inside the grocery shop, the freezer aisles, the junk aisles, the chemicals and byproducts aisles overrules the natural sections of products. Now that you understand what the sickness and death can cost your company, how are you liable for the sickness and death of the consumers since you own the Corporation of Canada? Remember the laws that your government created, the bars within the House of Glass? The House of Glass made sure when he created all the different laws for each manufacturing of industries, because that's who they are. They manufacture their own products for consumer use. So the laws could be, if you work in the food industry, then you need to take courses in other industries in order for you to be certified to work inside that industry of trade.